Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Reapercast. Thanks for joining me today. We have finally reached episode 6 and boy was this a challenge. This was one of the most difficult things that I've actually initiated. It was a project that honestly I did not expect myself to be able to reach this particular point. In fact, we are already up to the halfway point, which is actually quite frightening, quite scary because we've already got rid of so many decks and there is a lot more to get rid of, and it is just getting more and more difficult every single episode. I am so much more attached to the final decks that I actually have, and because of that it's so much harder to just part ways with them. I can't part ways with them that easily. You know, I want to play decks that represent myself obviously, but even so, a lot of these decks, even if they don't necessarily or fully represent who I am as a duelist, be it as playstyle or the artwork or the aesthetics of the deck and all, it's still something that I hold to a special place in myself because of the fact that I've spent quite a bit of time playing some of these decks, you know. I haven't necessarily completed all of these decks, but I do still have some bits and pieces of them where I'm actually working towards actually completing these decks. And by doing so, I'm still dedicating time to actually playing these particular decks online. And when I'm actually dedicating my time to so many different decks at once, it becomes so convoluted to actually focus on the ones I really want to, and sometimes it could really mess up my actual plays, any of my particular strategies I want to incorporate into certain decks that don't work in others. It gets mixed up sometimes and it just becomes really problematic, and this is something that happened once I reached to about over 100 decks, which is definitely a really crazy amount when you think about it. But at this point we've got rid of so many decks already. I believe our total count at the moment is 47 decks that we've managed to get rid of. Our goal is to get rid of somewhere around 70 decks, so we have roughly 23 more decks to try and get rid of, and that will definitely be quite a challenge because I am very attached to the remaining decks that I have. So removing these, I'd just like to let you guys know that it's not easy. It definitely was very difficult. But with that being said, I am going to be talking about a few of these decks today, and all of these decks that I'll be mentioning in this particular video are decks where they're actually incomplete decks. So what I mean by this is I don't even have a core for it. It's more so I have bits and pieces of these particular cards for the decks, and I've just been slowly working my way towards accumulating the cards. And all of these decks, well not all of them, but some of them, I was actually quite close to even buying a complete core off someone else to actually complete these decks. But the thing is this, there were quite a few of them, and let's just say that if you accumulate them all together, it would just stack up to a lot of money. So it's kind of another benefit that I'm getting rid of these decks or deciding to part ways with them, so that it's also another method to save money. However, let's just begin with the first deck here, which is Super Quantles. So Super Quantles came out a long time ago, back in Wing Raiders, which is a really old set of course. However, it was one of those decks that really just didn't stand out compared to the Raid Raptors and the Phantom Knights. And when it came to the Super Quantles, it was played by a lot of casual players. In fact, I was more focused on actually building Raid Raptors at the time, so I ignored the Super Quantles, not knowing that a lot of their prices actually just went up, so it became more and more difficult to actually accumulate the cards. I did have a few of the cards. For example, I had Green Layer and I had Blue Layer, but they were really cheap cards, and I just couldn't get Red Layer. That was one of the cards that really held me back from actually completing the deck. Even till this very day, I still need Red Layers for my other decks as well, but I don't have them. So I just have small bits and pieces of the more cheaper cards available for the Super Quantles, and it's just been so long. At this point, I've been playing them online for quite a few years now, but I've kind of grown tired of them, to be honest. When I think about it, I have not completed the deck in real life of course, but I've also just spent so much time playing with them online, and it's just become something that I don't feel is necessary anymore to actually completing. I'm still looking for red layers to add to my other decks, but as for the main pure Super Quantal deck itself, I'm pretty much giving up on it. Moving on, we have the Fluffles, the Edgeimps, and the Frightfurs. I'm actually counting this as one archetype because of the fact that they're all meant to be cards that work together. So I'm just going to refer to them as the Fluffles, but the Fluffles were something that came out a really long time ago, and I had been accumulating the cards since they were first introduced, even before they came out in Fusion Enforcers, which was the set that really just gave full support towards the archetype. But being that it was definitely very difficult to accumulate the cards, I think Fluffles is one of the most difficult archetypes to actually get all the cards for. So because of that, it was just really difficult for me to keep track of where and every single card that I was meant to actually be looking for to add to my deck. And because of that, with all of the other decks I had to focus on as well, it was just becoming more and more of a challenge, and it was just really annoying. I'm not even close to finishing it, so with that being said, it's also a deck that I'll be parting ways with. Moving on here, we have a more recent deck, and that is the Eldritch deck. So I did buy a few packs of Secret Slayers, and I opened a few of those packs off camera, but I did manage to pull some of the cards. And last time we talked about myself getting rid of the Adamantipators in one of the previous episodes, and that was because I pulled several of those cards from Secret Slayers. Well, I've also pulled some Eldritch cards, and I thought to myself, I'm not actually keen on building this deck. It's a deck that I think too many people are playing with them right now, and so because of that, I didn't want to play a deck that was so, I guess, common around different players. I didn't want to play the same card that most players were playing. I wanted to play something that was more unique. And not to mention, the Eldritch the Golden Lord is a really expensive boss monster. I didn't want to go full in to actually buying that particular card for my deck, so because of that, in order to save money and also time and stick to uniqueness in decks, I chose to pretty much abandon the Eldritch deck, which was pretty much just a few cards. And mind you, if you guys were actually wondering, I bought these Secret Slayer packs long before I actually initiated the Project E series, so it was a deck that was already part of the lists of cards that I was going to build, and the only reason why I even kept it this long with the intention to build them was because it was more of a recent deck and I wanted to give it more of a chance, but it just didn't stick to me at all, so it's going to have to go. Now moving on, I'm going to be talking about the Fortune Fairies and also the Battle Wasps at the same time. Both of them came out in Battles of Legend, and I only bought a few packs of those and opened them, and it was mainly just to play against my friends for fun, where we just bought whatever remaining packs were left in the stores and built a quick budget deck to play against. And I just accumulated quite a bunch of the Fortune Fairies and Battle Wasps, not enough to actually complete those decks, but enough for me to at least take an interest and then build them online and try them out. And I just had bits and pieces, and just literally I think 2 or 3 weeks ago I actually organized the deal where I was actually going to go and collect the full complete cores for both the Fortune Fairies and Battle Wasps together. So the Fortune Fairies, it was about $15 for the core, and the Battle Wasps were going to be $25 for the core. So it was going to be $40 for both decks, which, mind you, it is cheap, but I didn't want to dedicate any more of my time towards these two particular decks. Even if they were cheap, it doesn't mean that I should be building them. If anything, I should be spending more time focusing on the decks that I really want to focus on. So none of these decks really were interesting for the long run. It didn't really represent me as a duelist who wanted to play cards based off aesthetics or playstyle. So because of that, both of these decks were pretty much just cut off, and I pretty much cancelled the deals just a few days ago to not get those particular cores. So yeah, it was definitely quite a significant decision that I actually made. Now as for the final deck that I actually wanted to talk about, it's a very old archetype and it is going to be Super Heavy Samurais. Now the Super Heavy Samurais came out a long time ago, like 2 series ago, and because of that there were a lot of cards that started coming out bit by bit in every single set. They were common cards, so it was somewhat easy to get for some of them, but you also had all of those much higher rarity cards which I never actively pursued, and I was pretty much just going with the flow, accumulating bits and pieces of the commons, and it just became something that was just too much to handle, too much to actually focus on. It felt like the Fluffles, where you had a bunch of cards for the deck itself, but the cards individually all came from multiple different sets, making it hard to keep track of. And same thing applies for the fact that it wasn't necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing deck as well, and it also wasn't the deck that suited my playstyle. So because of that, although I kept it for this long, and mainly the reason why I kept it this long was because it's one of those decks that I've been building for such a long time, or trying to complete for such a long time, and so it kind of held that certain attachment with me. But I think I decided to pretty much just part ways with it. It wasn't a deck that was really holding up anymore, so it just had to go. Now finally, as a bit of a bonus, these 2 decks aren't necessarily going to be included into here because I don't own any of the cards, and it's more so decks that I decided to build on a whim online. So I don't actually own any of these decks, which is why I'm not including it in these particular videos, or in this particular project at least, and that is the Wind-Ups and the Ghost Tricks. So the Ghost Tricks were a deck that I wanted to build for a long time, but I never went and actively pursued getting all of these cards. Because of that, I only played with it online for such a long time, but decided to pretty much just give up on it and spend time focusing more on the decks that I really wanted to focus on. Not to mention, Ghost Tricks, no matter how hard you try, it just doesn't hold up in this particular format. Even against casual decks, it really just doesn't do well. But also with the Wind-Ups, the reason why I wanted to play Wind-Ups, this was more of a recent thing, but Wind-Up Magician came off the ban list a few ban lists ago, and because of that, it kind of got me into this notion of wanting to play it. So I tried to build a deck online. However, it didn't work out for me. Unfortunately, it just really was not good at all. Without the original Zen Mighty, you really just couldn't pull off a lot of combos, and it was pretty much just a standard Xyz deck with a bunch of searches like Tenki for Rabbit, or Reinforcement of the Army for the Warrior cards. So it was just not the deck that held up like it used to be in its prime. So because of that, it was a deck that I also just gave up on as well, and really quickly as well. I only spent a few weeks playing with it. But both of these decks were played online, so I'm not including it into this. I'm only including the ones that I talked about previously, so the Super Quantals, Fluffles, Eldritch, Fortune Fairy, Battle Wasps, and the Super Heavy Samurais. So that is 6 new decks that I'm adding into this list here. So we had 47 previously, and now we're adding in 6, so that brings us up to a total of 53 decks, meaning we still have 17 more decks to get rid of. Of course, we do have 6 more episodes left over to get rid of the remaining 17 decks, but mind you, at this point we've reached the halfway point. We've got rid of so many decks, it's going to be a huge challenge to get rid of whatever remaining decks I have left. However, I think this video has definitely dragged on long enough, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you guys actually feel about these particular decks that I mentioned today. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, share, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell notification as well. I hope you all have a fantastic day. I'll see you all next time.